Mercedes enthusiast. Alright, so I'm really supposed to be doing some work on my doctorate, and to be honest, I just want to tune cars and build like large drones. So it's kind of difficult right now to focus on that. This video is like a little bit of a distraction. I've got 2 days to turn in this project. So anyway, let's just get going right now. I wanted to talk a little bit about my favorite threads on Mercedes-Benz World. And these threads are just like really, really fun to read. They're really interesting. And I'll probably do some screenshots if I can put that much effort into this video. I don't know if I can with my time crunch here. But basically, I'll just run through them right now and then maybe show you them later. So the first one is build the fastest CLS 550 thread. This is a really cool thread. I think it's really interesting. You get to learn a lot about turbos. You get to hear a lot about, Gardever. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but I just call him G. G's build, it's really cool. He starts off with M157 turbos. Then he goes and just builds his own manifold and turbo setup, which is really, really interesting. He's trying to get over 1,000 horsepower, and I think he gets pretty close. I think he gets 789. But some of the big takeaways in this thread are he says the intercooler is pretty restrictive. He definitely doesn't like the stock manifold for the CLS 550. He definitely likes at least the AMG version, and he actually built a different one later. Like the turbo exhaust side is what he says, the hot side. So maybe that's not exactly the manifold. That might just be like, the H pipe or something. But there's some interesting thoughts there too, because he just completely redoes that part. I don't think he does too much with the TCU tune. I know he removes some of the torque limiters, but I'm not sure he actually tunes the TCU, which I think holds back his build a little bit. But I'm not 100% on it, but that was what I was thinking when I looked at it. Another interesting point is he points out that his torque converter setup was able to handle 1,390 Newton meters of torque. So that's a lot more torque than officially. I mean, it's almost double. So a lot of our cars are set up for 650 Newton meters of torque limit, and gears 1, 2, and maybe like 5, 6, 7. So he also, like, pushing it that much is way above like what my TCU tune was, which pushed it to like 900 Newton meters. So that's a really interesting point. And to be honest, I've had this thought. There's a small part of me that thinks there may be a way to get actually more power out of the CLS 550 than the 63, because I think the 63 has kind of a cool lockup mechanism. It's not a torque converter. It's like a clutch plate. It's like a single clutch plate. I think they call it an MCT, but it's not exactly like a dual clutch setup. And I think that might limit the power handling a little bit, because they've never put that on a V12 engine. They didn't put it on the 65, and they didn't put it on the 600. So I've always thought that might be a possibility, and it looks like when you get 1,390 Newton meters or whatever of torque put down, that might actually be true. Now, for whatever reason, every single, I've never seen a like-for-like 63 build be slower than a 550, but when you start really pushing it, you do get really close. So like, Start Line Motors gets 10.49 out of methanol turbo TCU ECU setup on the CLS 550, and they get like 10.3 on the E63. Similar engines, similar setup. In fact, I think they use a little bit better turbos on the E63. So that's kind of an interesting takeaway right there. Another really interesting thing he mentions is that like you can lose fifth gear. He says don't dyno in fifth gear. So that's, a kind of a point you might want to consider. So anyway, these are some interesting points of that thread, but you should definitely look through it. It's the Build the Fastest CLs thread. Alright, the next part of this is a really hot section of MBworld. Now, I really like MBworld. There's a ton of knowledge. There's a lot of really helpful people. And, there's some pretty interesting threads, forum, sponsors get in fights sometimes. You can see the tuners go back and forth. It's just really interesting because, I'm just a guy. I'm going for a business, doctorate, not a mechanics doctorate, you know what I mean? I wonder if they have a doctorate in mechanical engineering. I'm sure they do. But anyway, so in this thread, in this subsection, it's kind of buried, but it's the AMG section, and it's the E, class. I think it's a W212, and in there you can see a lot of information about the M157 and 278 platforms, which is very helpful. I didn't see it for a long time. There's people like Nada AMG who just post there. So there's a lot of really interesting information there. Even if your car isn't exactly an AMG, the 278 engine is really close to the 157, and some of the guys who are really pushing it just stick to that lane. They don't really swim in the normal CLS C218 thread. So you might want to check that out too. And within that section, one of the best threads was set up by, I don't think it's Jake. I think he has a different name, but it's one of the Eurocharged guys. Maybe it's Jeremy, I don't know. But anyway, Brabus, Texas, right? That's the name. And he goes and looks at all of the fastest times of the M157s and puts them in like a table. And kind of distills some information from them, the builds. Here's what he suggests are like keys, right? One, you have to have the TCU and ECU tune, right? He says you're not going to do anything without the TCU tune. The second thing he suggests is that, a lot of these people are running secondary or better air intakes, upgraded air intakes. And I know that, like, just for example, on the same forum like section, testing the Brabus, not the Brabus intake, but like it's similar to the Brabus intake. They're testing the Black Boost intake, and it looks like they're putting down 50 more wheel horsepower with that intake. I've also seen Chris Mannix mention that on one of his beautiful builds, the CLS63, with turbos, water mist injection, everything ready, or water, WMI, water methanol injection, that he was only able to tune it, it's an everyday tune, but it was only like 680 horsepower, which is really, really low. And although that's wheel horsepower, a setup like that should be able to go and get really close to 1,000 horsepower for everyday driving. And he mentions that he thought the air intake held that one back a lot. So air intakes are one of the things he puts down. And he just sort of looks at like a meta-analysis and kind of has some interesting thoughts on it. One of the things that I really like to see are the ethanol, people running ethanol, because the E85s and E50 tunes are kind of new. E50 tune allows you to go to 93 or E50, but I wouldn't go from E50 directly to 93, But they're kind of interesting because those cars are really fast. I've seen ones at 10.1 second, stripped interior with an ice chiller in the back. But they drove to the track. Another one I saw was a 10.3 or 10.4, and that was an M157 with a TCU and ECU tune, but there is no upgraded turbo, and I don't even think it had methanol. I don't think they used it with the ethanol. So that's an interesting takeaway, is that these cars can get very fast on ethanol, very, very fast. And I think that we're starting to see people adopt that more. I think there's maybe a little bit more profit margin, perhaps, potentially, in the bigger turbos and whatever. So the tuners went to that initially, but they've circled back and gone to ethanol. And if you could combine an ethanol with a big turbo car, you might get something really, really fast. And in fact, even an M278 could be pretty fast on ethanol with a TCU and ECU tune. I haven't seen one yet, but I would guess they're going to be in the 11 seconds. I mean, easily, like low 11 seconds, I would imagine, maybe even high 10 seconds. Just because you can get so much power out of ethanol without worrying about detonation. And Black Boost is definitely expensive, and you might just want to copy it, to be honest. If you're an M278 guy, you might not want to spend $1,400 on an air intake. I'm really sorry about that, Tassos, but I mean, let's be honest, like, the 278s are like the value proposition. I mean, they really do put down the power, but, the people buying them probably want better examples at less money. A lot of the 157s are a little bit, a lot more expensive, and they've been pushed harder. So 278 guys, kind of need to be a little bit more cognizant of how much it costs to build it out, or when you cater to these guys, because they're not, the normal big spender. They can't afford AMG tax. Let's really be honest. And I hate to, like, I don't want to like single anyone out, but I mean, there's some really good prices, really good quality of tuning, whatever. But right now, the Mercedes platform, in a lot of ways, is more expensive than like building out a BMW. Like a BMW platform is like $500 for an ECU tune. A Mercedes platform is going to be more than that. And the TCU tunes vary wildly too. I went with Merendi. I tried to go with Jake. We kind of exchanged a few emails. I love that guy. He's fun, man. But I ended up going with Merendi because I just, it was just a lot less expensive, and we were just sort of playing, Facebook Messenger tag. So that would be something else. And I actually like these groups, these forum posts. I think they're more informative than the Facebook groups. The Facebook groups are great. The Instagram, pictures are beautiful. But one of the reasons why I set up Tune Mercedes group was because I felt like maybe we could bridge the gap a little bit, where we'd have like kind of like a smaller group of people from MBworld who would just sort of talk to each other, CLS guys, but a little bit more technical, a little bit more like do-it-yourself type of stuff. We're not mechanics, a lot of us, although there's a lot of great tuners on there. You got Bloodsport, you got, Jake's on there. I really appreciate that. Dimitri's on there. I appreciate all these guys. So, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to, point out a couple of these threads, and, I really appreciate everyone watching. Thank you for this distraction from my, from the real world, if you will. All right, till next time.